important. And I'm happy to see some of the students and the doctoral students that are here today, because I think that my story is unique to me, but not unique to the Latino immigrant experience. Many Latino immigrants have the same similar story. It might be different geographically. It might have been in a different time period, but the experiences are kind of the same. And so for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And for those of you that are joining us on Zoom, thank you so much for being here and sharing part of your afternoon with us as we continue in participating in the Latino Heritage Month speaker series. So let me, because Professora Miramontes asked me to focus on the educational journey, I'm gonna weave a little bit of my familia history in there because the two are intertwined. And if you've been reading the work on intersectionality, you know that, they're all connected, and they help form who you are, your identity, and then the person that you become. So let's see. So I'm going to start with my journey, and Professora Rama shared, did a wonderful introduction. So this is me, this is my familia. These are my two boys. The one on the end is the oldest and the one in the middle is the youngest, but they actually look different. Like the one in the middle looks older than the one on the end. But like in families, even in families, and the reason that I share this with you is because part of my talk is going to share about how even in the same families, depending on when people arrive to this new country, really changes their perspective of who they are and how they develop. So this is why I love Julia Alvarez's book, How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accent. If you've ever read that, it's a wonderful read, because depending on when the girls came to the United States, they were either very much considered themselves an outsider and very much an immigrant, or they assimilated and only spoke English and they were very much American. That's my husband on the right, and they're the basis of who constitutes my nuclear family. So as Professor Brahma said, I am faculty member in the Ed Division, director of the MAT Teacher Preparation Program, and that's what I do for Pepperdine. And then externally, outside of Pepperdine, I was just recently elected as secretary for CABE, the California Association for Bilingual Teacher Educators. That is a group of higher education professors across the state that come together and chat about best practices in bilingual ed and how to support programs and teacher candidates out in the field. I was just recently appointed, I was telling Sonia, as the CABE Region 3 rep. And that's professionally. I'm also part of the Cal Council, California Council on Teacher Education. I helped lead the Equity and Social Justice SIG. And in addition to that, at home, I'm really involved in the community. So we have a series of group experiences that we help lend support to. We love to mentor the next generation of kids in our city. So anytime that we can do that, we do that through our parish. We offer these workshops for kids going into higher education or thinking about higher education. And I'll share a little bit about my experience going into higher education and how fundamental that is. Because sometimes we hear parents say, well, if the child really wants, this is what I hear from parents, si el niño de veras quiere, if the child really wants, they will pursue it. No, we know better, right? We know that it takes a lot of work, even with my own two boys that had excellent education, how much time and energy we had to spend as parents helping facilitate that experience for them. So I've titled my talk, A Mexicana's Journey, and I'm going to share with you why Mexicana, especially in this day and age and in this month. If you've been looking online, it's either Hispanic Heritage Month, Latinx Heritage Month, Latino Heritage Month, and then there's a myriad of terms, right? There's Chicano, Chicana, Latinx, Latine. I have a student that just finished last year and she preferred to use the term in her dissertation as Latine. And there's this Latino with the @ sign. So it just goes to show how diverse, even within Latino communities, we are, and that there's not a consensus around what specifically we all want or are comfortable with in terms of labels. And for me, Mexicano has always been a term that's been used at home. It's been used as a term that endears a lot of pride. That's how I grew up. That's what I learned very early on. And so I used it. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a quick story. When I was working on my dissertation at UCSB, and I asked all the kids, because I was working in bilingual classrooms, I asked all the kids, so hey, so if somebody comes to you, this was fourth graders at the time, and ask you, how do you identify yourself? Do you say Hispanic, Latino? I was just putting it out there, Mexican American. And they're like, oh no, we're Mexicanos. So when I wrote that into my dissertation and I went to defend my dissertation, one of my committee members says, I think you have a typo. I think you meant to write Mexican. And I said, no, I said, I'm using their words because I asked for them for their identification. So this is what they said. They said Mexicanos. That's why I use the term, because it really identifies who I am. So let me tell you a little bit about my journey, and then I will share how this connects to education. And I guess if you have any questions in between, please ask them, because I envision this much more as a conversation. So my parents are from Mexico, from the state of Guerrero. If you know anything about Mexico, it's on the Pacific coast, and a lot of people during the 50s and 60s highlighted Acapulco as a resort town to go and visit. My parents come from very humble beginnings. My mom is from Acapulco. My dad is from a town further inland, about an hour away from Acapulco. And he grew up in a very rural community. And they are what people would call campesinos today and age, people that mine the land, and the land provides for their subsistence. My mom and dad had very little formal education. Mom finished elementary school because she was in the city. Dad had to drop out in fourth grade because he had to go work to support the family. It's not atypical for families, even today, for children to leave school in Latin America to go and work to support their families. They knew very early on, they had heard many stories. They didn't know all of the ramifications of what would come with it, but they had heard of El Norte, which meant further north. And if they went further north, there was more opportunities. So they decided, once mom and dad met and married, to move to Tijuana, which is, if you know your geography, just on the other side of the border, south of San Diego. They moved there right after they had recently married, and that's where me and my sister were born. So this is a picture of me and my sister in Tijuana. I think I've asked mom, but she says, I think you were 3 and your sister was 2. My sister and I are only a year apart. And this is us in Tijuana. And so even if we were in Tijuana, we were still very Mexicanas. That's the language and the experience and everything that we had. So I was born in Tijuana. Dad was recruited from Tijuana to come work in the United States. He, as many Mexicanos, and some of you may relate to this experience, worked in many very different employment experiences. They followed the money, they followed the work experience. And so Dad did a lot of different jobs, but one of the things that he did really well, and still does really well, this is why everybody loves coming over for barbecues on Sunday, was a cook. And so he was recruited to come to the United States as a cook and be and settle in Thousand Oaks. He was working in one of the original Mexican restaurants that existed there. And we were one of 3 families at the time, this is the late 60s, that were Mexicanos in Thousand Oaks. But still, you know, our environment at home was very much Mexicano. We hung out with the other 3 families that were Mexicanos. And when we went to the restaurant, people would say, you know, it's so great that your dad works here. So I always grew up with that experience, thinking, you know, that being Mexicano was such a privilege and had a lot of attributes to it. I started my early schooling in Thousand Oaks. I did K-1-2. And I remember, maybe because parents talk about this experience more than I actually remember, because I must have been 5 at the time when I was getting ready to go to kinder, but Dad would sit me at the table and make me write out our home address. you know, what's your address? I don't even remember what the number is, but I still remember the street name. So 3283 Hillcrest, 3283 Hillcrest, just like they do in the old days, right? Write it 50 times, twice a week. I didn't know this at the time, but the school bus back in the days would still come and pick up all the kids in the neighborhood and take them off to the schools. And the schools weren't really in the neighborhood at the time. And Dad was deathly afraid that I was going to get lost because I didn't speak English. My world was in Spanish. So, so he made me write that twice a week. And I still remember 3283 Hillcrest Drive. And I think that if I go to Thousand Oaks, I might even find the address, but the house might no longer be there. I remember going to school and being very excited because everybody kept saying, when you go to school, you know, you learn, you read, you do this, blah, blah, and falling into what now I understand being somebody that teaches second language development as falling into the silent period. So not knowing how to interact or work with within the school environment because I didn't have English to facilitate that experience. I don't remember much of my K1-2 experiences except for pictures that Mom has. But I do remember one incident when Dad had to come pick me up from school. Apparently it was Valentine's week and all kids in elementary school pass out Valentine cards. And what did I know about Valentines and Valentine cards? And so kids bring Valentines. All the kids were dropping off Valentines to everyone because teacher made you bring Valentines for everybody. And I brought them to share. And so apparently some kids were upset at that I had not brought anything to share. And so one kid decided to put a tack on my chair. And so when I came back to sit down, you know, went through this, you know, screech, yelp, cry, and could not communicate with my teacher. So as my teacher is shaking me, what's going on? What's going on? I don't know, you know, how does a 6-year-old or 7-year-old get that out? And so Dad had to come pick me up and take me home. So that was the first negative experience in my schooling in early years. I said my parents are from Acapulco, Guerrero, and after second grade, we moved back to Acapulco. Dad, I told you they were campesinos, and so his dad was ill, my paternal grandfather, and so we had to go home to, Dad was the oldest male, had to figure out the land, the brothers, the house. My dad's family has the 3 elder siblings and the 4 younger siblings. And so there was, what's going to happen if, you know, grandpa's not there? And what about the younger siblings? And what about grandma? And so we moved back to Acapulco, Guerrero, even though we lived with my maternal grandmother. Dad was working with his family out in the village. So we didn't know we were going to stay for a year. We ended up staying for 1.5 years. And what happens when kids are small, you have to send them to school. So here goes Mom and registers me at school. I go into, I think I'm supposed to be in 3rd grade. And again, interestingly enough, I have to talk to Dr. Krashen. He's a friend of mine online now. If any of you know the work of Dr. Krashen, he is the premier author on second language development and professor emeriti from USC, and a really good friend of a dear friend of mine at Seaver. And so that's how we connected and have these online chats. But who knew that going back into your native language environment, you would fall into a silent period again, which is what happened, because then they put me in 3rd grade. And lo and behold, they discovered that I had no repertoire for doing schooling in Spanish. I could speak the language. I had basic communication skills, but I did not have literacy in Spanish. And so the teachers thought at the time, well, what if we put them in a lower grade? So this is sister and I, because sister and I are only a year apart. So all of the things that you know that happen to kids that come to the United States was happening to me when I went back to Mexico. So they said, what if we put her in 3rd grade and the sister in 2nd grade? That didn't work out. But they said, well, what if we put her in 2nd grade, the sister in 1st grade? And so they kept moving us until there was no more grades to put us in, because we didn't have basic Spanish literacy. Apparently I was supposed to be going into, I think, 3rd grade at the time. And so it was a year of learning for us. They pulled us, my mom pulled us out from the local public school and sent us to a preschool. So here I was, 7 years old, working with 4 and 5-year-olds so I could learn the basics like colors and alphabet and numbers in my native language, because I did not have that. I could identify them, but I did not know how to use them and put them together to create linguistic academic work. So if that experience wasn't traumatic enough, then we came back to the United States. I was probably 8 at the time. Thank God for bilingual education is wide scale in the state of California. So the year must have been 1971. We came back to the United States. Dad was sure that we were going to go back to Thousand Oaks and settle. And I keep looking at Dr. Calhoun because I know she's from Thousand Oaks. And he said, you know, there's this town called Pomona. We're going to stop there 6 months. Let me work. Let me make some money. We'll move back to Thousand Oaks because that's where we had a community. That's where we had friends. We never left. We have been in Pomona since 1971. And so, of course, they enrolled us in the local public school. And again, thank God for bilingual education. I think that was my saving grace, because now I could use both of my linguistic repertoires, whether it be English or whether it be Spanish. Both were accepted, although this is also the time that I started to learn about this notion of Spanglish, because I had not had an experience to hear that colloquial language in the community, because you know, either I was too young or I was learning formal Spanish while I was in Mexico, and now I was back. And I'll tell you, because when we came back and they decided to do a language assessment, where are they in terms of their linguistic development? Me and my sister, because my sister and I traveled together in school. The teacher comes over like they usually do, and they put the exam in front of you, and she says to us, "No taches." And so sister, not understanding, picks up the paper. She thinks, you know, if somebody puts something in front of you and you don't know or understand, pick it up and then looks at it. And the teacher says, "Te dije no taches." And so I turned to my sister and I said, "I think that means no touch," because I was surprised at how much English actually was coming back so quickly, which in Spanish would have been no toques. But teacher said no taches, which is a combination. No understanding. You know, bilingual education, I think, really became a saving grace for me, and why it became such an important part of my own experience and professional development as I grew. My parents moved around a lot but this time in Pomona. We stayed in Pomona again because either they were renting and had to move, or they were moving from one side of town to the other because of job experiences. So by the time I finished high school, I had been to 7 elementary schools, 1 parochial school, 2 different high schools. I was what was called an English learner, very much an introvert, because imagine all of these different places doesn't allow you to develop a community or friends. I was immigrant or first generation. My parents didn't participate in the school experiences, not because they didn't want to, but because they were either all the time working, which is what I remember, or when they were not working, they were either too tired or didn't feel like they were welcomed in the schools. And then as the eldest, by this time my brother was born, I was caring for the older siblings. So it also meant that I had very little time for extracurricular experiences. So with these kinds of demographics, those of you in education, what are the probabilities that the person like this with these characteristics in history is going to go to college? Right? And so as one of the, I believe, one of the elements that really helped me develop an understanding about schooling and how important schooling was my parents' appreciation for education. I told you my parents had basic education. Mom finished elementary school, Dad got to the 4th grade, but they knew how much education made a difference. Dad's family has the older siblings and the younger siblings. Most of the older siblings immigrated to the United States. The younger siblings stayed in Mexico. So the older siblings, and I always tell this story because there's a bickering between my mom and dad, because I always say we grew up with dad supporting two families, us and his younger siblings back home. And so as the older siblings got settled in the United States, they started sending money back home. So he had a brother that became a physician, an MD, a sister that's a registered nurse and works in a hospital now, and then a brother that works in government offices. So the life experiences of the younger siblings and the older siblings are very different. And so dad always said, well, si mi hermano lo puede hacer, you know, if his brother can do it in rural Mexico, then what's your excuse? He would always tell us, right? So there was a lot of pressure for us to go to school, even though parents participated very little in school. And so as I got ready to go to college, I kept thinking, you know, what's the process? How do I do this? Where do I find the resources? Who's going to give us an orientation? I remember going to my high school counselor and telling them, I think I want to go to this place called UCLA, because I always told dad, you know, I'm going to be a doctor like your brother. Watch, you wait and see. I thought I was going to be a pediatrician. And I remember going to my high school counselor and telling them, I think I want to go to UCLA. And my high school counselor telling me, I don't think so. I think you should go to a community college. And I said, okay, all right. I didn't know any better, right? Who was going to guide me, or who was going to open the doors for me? And so that was my experience, kind of just going through school, always paying attention, but not really engaged or really enthusiastic about the experience in education. I also remember fourth grade. Fourth grade changed my life, because in fourth grade, Mr. Clark, Mona Unified, Kellogg Elementary, said all the kids that come into his classroom had some kind of special gift to share with the rest of the students. And he said, what's your special gift? What do you do? Is it dance? Is it music? Is it art? What is it? Whatever it is, you have to showcase for us. So he would have us come up to the front of the class and showcase our gifts. And by this time I was like, what do I have to share? And so the academic year had moved through. And I remember when the Christmas program came around that year, he said to me, and God bless Mr. Clark, he said, Mr. Marshall, he said, Reyna, you speak Spanish, right? And I said, yes. He says, well, you're singing the lead song in the Christmas pageant. And I said, I am? And he says, yeah. He says, because look, it's in Latin. And I said, okay. In his mind, Latin and Spanish were kind of close. But you know what? There was an environment of everybody taking risk and being accepted. Nobody failed in that class. And so I got up there and I sang. And I think that's what really got started to turn things and experiences around for me. Anyway, when the UCLA recruiter came to my high school, and I heard on the PA system, those of you that signed up for the UCLA recruitment talk, come down to the multi-purpose room. And I thought, I should just go find out a little bit more of information. So I snuck out of French, went down to the multi-purpose room. And I said to the recruiter, I said, I know I can't go. I know that I, probably don't have the grades. I don't even know how to get in. But what is it that I have to do? Because I think I want to go to UCLA. He said, send me your transcripts. That's all it took. I didn't know at the time that I had a 3.8 and that I was eligible and had met all the A through Gs at the time to get into a four-year institution. I went to UCLA. I went to UCLA as a kinesiology major because I had met all the sciences, because I told you I was going to be a pediatrician. I was trying to outdo my dad's brother because I thought for sure I'm going to be a physician. But UCLA, if those of you that have been to UCLA know, the competition is fierce, the experience. And so I soon found out that I wasn't very good at chemistry. Biology was okay, math was okay, but chemistry kind of kicked my butt. And so I thought, oops, we're online, right? And this is being recorded. And I thought, maybe I can't do this. And so had a deep talk with my counselors, and they said at the time, well, what is it that you're good at? And just like our career service helps everybody identify their strengths. It said, you know, you're a really great writer and you're a great reader. And then there's all the social sciences. And so I kept thinking, what am I going to be? What am I going to study? What am I going to do in this time that I'm here? And I had such a passion for history because I also remember in high school learning about the Mexican-American War in high school, I think 9th grade, and going home and talking to Dad. And I said, how did I miss this when we were in Mexico? I missed a whole war. There's a Mexican-American War? And Dad said, no, there's no Mexican-American War. It's the US invasion of Mexico. That's what it's known like. And that's how it's written in the textbooks in Mexico. And so I knew I wanted to be a history teacher, and thus I pursued a history degree at UCLA with a minor in Latin American studies, and then had decided at the same time that I was at UCLA that I was going to pursue a teaching credential. It is the time that I was at UCLA that I started working for LAUSD. I started as an instructional aide. I quickly moved into the assistant for the bilingual coordinator, which I thought was like a natural because I had been a product of that program, and really, really loved being in schools. And just like my parents had ingrained in me that your experience and where you came from was something to be proud of, I loved sharing that with the kids. When the kids would come to me in elementary school and say, well, he called me, you know, a Mexican. And I'd say, well, are you? And they'd say, yeah. Well, right? But it's not that, kids, that they use these labels. It's the way they use the labels. And so had to do a lot of deconstructing for my students, but always made them feel proud of their heritage. I finished UCLA and I went to go work at the Claremont colleges. I was there. I thought I was going to pursue a master's. I was recruited by the Tomás Rivera Center, which is now at USC. The Tomás Rivera Center is one of the first leading Latino think tanks in the US. It was at the Claremont colleges, and I was hired as a research assistant. I started working on a national study by the Ford Foundation that was looking at colleges and universities around the United States that were recruiting, retaining, and certifying bilingual teachers, and which colleges were doing that at a higher percentage rate, and what were they doing to kind of have those kinds of statistics. And so as I started working in this area, I didn't know that they had an advisory board. So every time that we had the advisory board come share out their ideas about how to structure the study, where we were going to go, who we were going to identify, and how we were going to write up reports to our funder. The advisory board brought in these professors in higher education from all over the country: Harvard, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, University of Texas, El Paso, and series. I think there was like 10. And so I would sit at the table with these amazing minds. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And I didn't know research could be so fun, and that I'm really excited about this, and that my experiences were actually what they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear how people were getting into education and what drew them from one institution to another. It is there that I met, I didn't know at the time, my future advisor for my dissertation from UC Santa Barbara, who said, Reyna, you really need to go into a doctoral program. And at the time, didn't even know what a doctoral program was. I knew that I was going to get a teaching credential. I knew that I was going to be a fabulous high school history teacher, that I was going to teach kids, that I was going to change their lives. But a doctorate, that was like not even in my wildest dreams. And I didn't know what to do or what to expect from going down that road. And so remember always having lots of discussions, both with my family and with other people that were on that journey. What does it mean to get a doctorate? And I'm not sure that maybe you all had that same experience, but I did know that the roundtable always said, well, whatever you do, a doctor's just going to open more doors. And I thought, oh, okay, so there's some doors that I haven't even explored. So I went to UC Santa Barbara and got a doctorate in educational psychology. I think that the experience, the journey has always been, I was sharing this with somebody, that there's always been an additional door for me to explore. and that door has always been facilitated with great mentors and teachers, which is why I went into education and which is why I continue to do the mentoring that I do for our students. And now, well, I'm at Pepperdine. I've been at Pepperdine since I since I finished my doctorate. This is a picture of my son, the youngest, the one that looks the oldest. This is him on the left. And that's my dad, one of my dad's younger brothers. We recently got an opportunity to go back to Mexico this summer. I didn't think it was going to be possible. And when people called and said, can you come? And I said, oh, okay, let me see who can go with me. I took my youngest son. I said, hey, you're going with me. And we went to go see my grandma's grave. She died during the pandemic. But, it's just the story coming back full circle, going back to your roots, and always identifying for myself, my boys, and the people that I surround myself with, the importance of who you are and your identity and those roots. So sorry, folks. And I'll leave you with a quote. This is from Cesar Chavez. Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. Cesar Chavez. Gracias. Open to questions, comments, feedback. If we want to, we've got a microphone right there. Nowhere. There's a microphone here somewhere.
Thank you. First of all, Dr. Garcia-Ramos, it's a pleasure being here with you and all of you as well. And I just want to say I'm very moved. I'm very moved, and you're very inspiring. I also came from Mexico, and I was born in Mexico, in northern Mexico, and I understand the struggle, right? It's the learning English and also caring, yes, absolutely, caring for your younger siblings as well. I had to experience that. I actually had to drop out of my volleyball team to care for my younger brother. Yes, so I just want to give you a big thank you. Thank you so much for representing our community so beautifully. And I wish I could continue, with my studies and continue representing my Latinx community, my Mexicana journey as well. But yes, thank you so much. I just want to give you those few words.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. GR. And anyway, it was a beautiful presentation, and I thought I knew everything about you, but I see there's a lot more.
There's always more. Peel back.
And I can relate with you. I'm not Mexicano, but I can relate with you with some of the things you went through in another way. But I really want to get up and hug you because
do that now.
Yeah. Because
yes. Dr. Calhoun is, I have the privilege of mentoring Dr. Calhoun. She is our postdoc fellow, and she's working with me, and I'm learning so much from her.
you, believe me, please.
Just, oh my gosh, what a beautiful presentation, and having worked with you for all of these years here, oh my gosh, and now getting to learn all of these amazing details. Well, first, as a librarian and someone who pushes scholarship, I would love to see this as a book, or, this story is significant and surprising and beautiful in so many different ways. There's so much love, there's so much learning, there's so much success and so much gratitude that I just had to say that. But also I'm curious as a parent, and also I'm an immigrant, In terms of your sons, your beautiful sons, so nice to see their pictures. What have your feelings been in terms of sharing your story with them and what you wanted them to know along the way and how you felt that was important, what pieces to share as they were growing up?
Yeah, great question. I actually think that I was very conscious of sharing all of the details with them when they were going up through their different stages. I think they understand it very well because as they went to school, I would say, hey, so you're going to school. And so this is what happened to me when I went to school. Maybe not in so much graphic detail, but just so they always understood. My oldest boy he is completely bicultural and bilingual because he learned how to read and write in Spanish. That was his primary language. My younger son, you know how it goes with other siblings in the household, because this is why I love Gloria Alvarez's book, because by the time my son came along, the younger one 6 years later, he mostly heard English from his brother. And so it was harder, but they're both very literate in Spanish, but we've shared so much. And so as my grandparents were still alive and the boys were younger, I made it an absolute, it was a decision we made early on in our marriage. I said the boys have to go meet their great grandparents. And so we would fly like every 3-4 years and spend, as much time as we could with my grandparents, their great grandparents. So they have a little bit of memory. They have lots of pictures. My younger one says, I don't remember, but I made sure that they went, that they knew that they had roots, that they had family, that they had. And now that my younger son is older and in college, he did a lot of traveling in Europe this last year when he was living abroad. But when he went to Mexico, he was just so excited to be surrounded by cousins and aunts and people that you haven't seen in years. We're talking like 8 years. And they just welcome you with open arms, like you just saw them last weekend. And so he was so excited about that experience and came back talking about it. And so I just appreciate it. And my older one, I will tell you, had a chance to go to Switzerland, go meet up with a friend. They were going to go to a conference, and he had this window when he was transitioning from home to his new job in the Bay Area. And he says, Mom, I have 2 weeks. I go to Europe? No, I go to Mexico. And he left on his own and he went to Mexico. So that's very telling of how grounded they are in their culture and language. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Reyna, thank you for sharing and for being as vulnerable and trusting this group with your vulnerability. I'm curious, for those starting on this journey, right? Immigrants, first gen, that are thinking about or dreaming about what this could be. Do you have any words of wisdom, any advice, any just tidbits of information that you can share?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think immersing yourself in the experience, and as the MAT candidates come in, I know the 1-year program is so fast, blah, blah. They don't have time for everything else, right? They don't have time to come to meetings, to experiences like this, extra opportunities. And I always say, immerse yourself in the experience. This is the one time that you're here and you're paying for it. Take advantage of all of those experiences. I know that it can become hard for those of us that are first generation. Do I go to that experience or do I put in more hours because it means extra, funding? I remember being like that in graduate school. I don't know if I can go to the talk. I still have to work. But finding that balance, because if this is something that you want to pursue, if this is something that you want to do, if this is the world that you want to live in, then you have to be able to see how it happens, not just from the student perspective, but what's happening on the other side from faculty and from staff and from those conferences. It's so important. And always looking out for who's going to be, your partner, your mentor, somebody that's going to help facilitate that for you. I always say that I got through my doctoral program with the woman who I now call my comadre. She is now Vice President of Community Affairs at Cal State San Marcos, because she was 2 years ahead of me. And everywhere she went, she said, Reyna, come with me, do this. So I had my own academic work to do, and then I would go see what she was doing. And then she'd say, come with me, I'm gonna go do this. I went with her when she presented her preliminary orals, and then when she finally finished, and then saw her go through that job application process. And so it was just so invaluable. I just don't even know, you know, how I would have finished had I not had that kind of mentoring. Yeah.
Oh, Reyna, that was just an amazing story. And I'm sure you have so many more. I'm just so moved and struck by your ability to just navigate all of this, no matter where you were, and get through and succeed. And I was so struck by the counselor who told you, no, just go to community college.
Mm-hmm.
And had it not been for this person who said, no, apply to UCLA.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, like, how many kids are still turned away?
Right.
And that key person, one person,
Mm-hmm.
can be the key to a whole door of opportunity or can
Mhm.
stymie them. And
Mhm.
I just wondered if you have any idea, like, what's going on in the school systems now to
Mhm.
try and prevent that sort of thing from continuing to happen.
Mhm. Mhm. And it continues to happen, unfortunately. And oftentimes because if you're first generation, I was at a conference this summer and somebody said, I was really confused when they said to me, when I went to financial aid, and they said, why did you check the box? It says first generation. And she was first generation, and now she's like a senior advisor for one of the UC schools. And she said, I didn't think there was anything first about me, because if you think about the terminology, first, like you're first in line because you have privileges, or you're in first class because you can pay for it, or the first lady. So first comes with a lot of connotations. And so sometimes even when those opportunities are there, we don't know to take them. With the kids that I do the mentoring with back home, we start talking early on in middle school, and we do this through our parish, and we just chat about, you know, school and what does it mean. For many of the Mexicano families, it's hard for them to let go of their kids and have them go to college. So we start kind of easing parents into that kind of experience, like, look at how, don't you want your children to be successful and independent, so that they can, if you want them to continue to contribute to the family, you know, they're going to be able to do it at a rate that wouldn't happen if they didn't go to college. But it's difficult. And what's happening with our schools, oh, that's like a whole other presentation, because it's happening. And you know, my husband's in healthcare, and he's in he has a background in economics, and he's always telling, what's going on with schools? Because he sees the data, he sees the statistics, and he says, you know, if we don't take care of our youth now, we're going to take care of them later. And that's on all of us as citizens. Financially, that's where our tax base is going to go. And it's not good for us in the future. So yeah.
I just want to just thank you, Gina, because exactly that comment about guidance counselor really struck me too, having recently read Michelle Obama's book. When she was told by, yeah, you remember this, right? That you're not, she was told you're not Princeton material. Yeah. So it's kind of the same. I just thought, what an interesting parallel. Yeah. Yeah. And sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doctora Garcia-Ramos, gracias. Your story was beautiful and inspiring, and I love how everything came full circle at the end. And like you said, it's really important to remember your roots. Mi papa's de Mexico, so my dad's from Mexico, and some of your funny and not so funny memories, I remember that part too in my life, and learning how to write vocales, vowels, and consonants in Spanish. My question is, just recently, do you have a project that was the most rewarding to you recently, where you gave back to the community or bilingual second language learners?
That's a good question. I actually did get a paper published what was that? Was it 21? 21 or 20? No, it was 21 in the multilingual educator. It was the year that I was in sabbatical, and we work with our parish. I grew up Mexicano Catholic, and so it was important for me to be able to give that foundation to my boys, although we have lots of discussions about what it means to be Catholic in the 21st century. But my youngest was on his journey to get confirmation, and I was on sabbatical, so I thought, I'll go teach. And so I went with him every time he went to confirmation class. I was one of the instructors for the faith journey for the youth. And of course, you know, like they do in all schools, they separate your kids and the parents. You can't teach your own kids. And I worked with a group of 9th graders. I had 16 kids in the class, and they were from all different schools in our city in Pomona. And so some of them went to the nice school up in the hill, and some of them went to the schools down on the south side, south of the railroad tracks. And the community is very diverse. But in my city particularly, I'm in Pomona, and it is the easternmost city in LA County. So after you go through Pomona, you're in San Bernardino County. And so it has like 70% Latino, and economically we're what they call a depressed economic a city. And I know all this terminology because my husband speaks economics. But anyway, so I went to go teach. I was working with 14, 16 kids, all boys. And the director said, I'm giving you the boys because nobody can handle the boys. And I said, give me the boys, because I had boys, right? And I love boys. I can work with any of the boys in secondary ed. And so there was a lot of tension because, you know, at 9th grade, and they come from different schools, so maybe rivalries. And then they didn't know each other, and then here they weren't really excited to be here. Parents were sending them, as many of us do, and on these faith journeys for our kids. And so we did a series of activities. I tried to build community. All my pedagogy and my training as a teacher educator, I brought that into the classroom. I brought in all kinds of stuff. I think I was doing way more that year that I was on sabbatical for this one class than you know, I usually do, because I was trying to draw them out of their shell. I was trying to build community for them. And then we would get into reading aloud. We would take the Bible and read it aloud. And about 3/4 of my kids would not read. They would not read aloud. And it wasn't because they were embarrassed. Many of them had very low literacy skills. And so, and they were 9th graders. And so I would do the faith journey curriculum, and then I'd weave in a little bit of college access. And I would tell them, like, if there was a word, I'd say, this is going to come up in your English class. And they'd tell me, Miss, this is religion. This is not English. And I'd say, I know, but this word is going to come up in your English class. You wait and see. And I tried to make connections, and more like a project-based learning. By the time we shut down, this was during the pandemic, in March of 2020, all my kids were reading aloud, 9th grade, aloud. They'd call, they say, can I go read next? They were coming up to read. They all knew that we respected each other, that nobody made fun of anybody because they didn't know how to sound out a word. They didn't know how to read it. They couldn't remember what it was. And they all shared about how their faith journey was helping them develop ideas for what they were going to do in their own schooling environment. So I wrote a piece. It's in the Multilingual Educator. And it's, I don't remember what it's entitled, but it's, I can get you the link. Well, thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you spending part of your Friday afternoon with me. Yeah, thanks. Thanks.